Hello and welcome to Two Wizards and a Mic, a podcast that you should be listening to or watching because pearls of wisdom fall from mainly his lips, not necessarily mine, but every single week. And by the way, this podcast is also sponsored by Cawood Publishing, one of the publishers of some of the greatest books you'll ever see in the D&D world. I'm not biased at all. How's it going?
Good, man. Yeah. So I'm Andrew. That's Shane over
Oh, that's
there.
right. I guess I should tell people who we are.
And we are two wizards and a mic.
And today we're talking about planning a D&D campaign, which
Yes.
is something we'll be here for the next 5 days. So buckle in, everyone.
Yes. Tonight we're just going to talk about it in general terms. And we could definitely we'll do shows on different aspects of this, but we're going to look at it as a whole. And as Shane says, there's a lot to talk about.
Oh yeah, there's so much that, like, when I saw this in our little prep document, I thought, wow, this is like a huge topic. But
Yeah,
and I love talking about it. So hey, even
it
better.
is. It is. And I think it's a good way to start for the dungeon master to get an idea of where to go from at the beginning. Um, and there's some general types of fantasy genres that are usually in Dungeons and Dragons. Of course, tables are, free to do what they want, and people have made lots of different versions of Dungeons and Dragons. There's, Western versions and modern day and superhero and science fiction versions. But we're going to mostly talk about the traditional fantasy versions. And the biggest one, obviously, would be epic or high fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, for example. Another one that is quite common is sword and sorcery, which is more the Conan style, where you have less
Yeah.
magic and it's more gritty and combat based. And then you also want to look at what kind of game do you want with your players. You have to decide. Do you want to really focus on which pillar? Because really D&D has three main areas. The first, combat; the second, role playing; and the third, exploration. Back in the day, like when Shane and I started, really combat was 80-90% of the focus.
Yeah.
Um, and now there's a push to have more role playing. Some people have entirely, role playing campaigns completely. And our group has had a few sessions where we've had only role playing, but not too many, but a few.
Yeah, not too. It's rare, but it does kind of throw a bit of a curveball for the players more than the DM, because if the one running the game is sitting there going, "I'm just going to let them talk." Yep, they're having this deep conversation about what they're going to do, and but it's a really hard skill too, because you have to know your character, right, like inside and out, which a lot of the time, I don't think a lot of, like, they know what the drive of the character is, they know where they came from, but they don't necessarily sit back and kind of go, my character today, for whatever reason, is going to talk about philosophy or explore, maybe they want to change the path of their religion, or something, and
Yeah.
which could be like, a character just pondering, and kind of, guys, what about, what if we follow so and so now instead of the one we've been following, which would also throw a curveball for any DM too. But still, it's rare to happen, but it is fun, I have to admit.
Yeah, I think it has its place. For me, it is a limit. It has limits for sure. And I personally, I would still focus mostly on what I would call, a story with a lot of action. Just like
Yeah.
most movies and television shows, if there's not, I mean, there are exceptions to having tons of action. For example, like the movie Lost in Translation, amazing movie, but almost nothing happens in the movie. Um, or of course Seinfeld, the TV series where really nothing. It's a show for the
Nothing
most part
occurred
about
from
nothing.
season 1 to season end, forget it.
Yeah, they're just in a coffee shop, and then they're home, and then they're back at the coffee shop, and then they're at the movie theater. So I think, most stories need a certain amount of action, and there's a reason in Dungeons and Dragons why creatures have stat blocks, and there's a reason why a lot of the game is built around action and combat, and that's really the tradition and still at the core of the game. I
Yeah,
think to have a good story, you need that role playing aspect, and it helps to have, I think, a certain amount of exploration, and that can have a different, different games can have a different amount or different focus on exploration. So there's a lot of choices there. Um, there's definitely more role playing now, and the fact that 5e is such a smooth system, it allows you to do more role playing and more exploration. But as you point out, I think there is a limit to role playing, and it starts to become another game at a
totally.
certain point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like any sort of film script. If you're writing anything for film, one of the things you have to always be when you're putting them together is there has to be like an action of some sort. I think it's the wisdom is kind of like every 10 pages there has to be an action beat. So your
Yeah,
characters could, talk about, I don't know, their day or their evening or whatever it might be for 10 minutes. But then something has to happen because you're going to lose your audience. And I think thinking of players as sort of an audience that they are involved with telling the story and are allowed, they have leeway to have their characters do something or pause or, have some sort of role playing aspect that sort of takes a bit of time. You'll always have, at least for me anyway, I always think that's cool, but at the same time, it's rare to happen because I think the players as a whole, sort of, if you have a really well cohesive sort of group of people that know each other quite well, they know when to go, you know what, I actually want to hear this, and then let it play out a little bit, and then go, you know what, however, we should probably go to the barn that we were supposed to be going to, because they kind of nudge each other sort of gently to to keep it moving forward. But
yeah,
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 it
yeah,
works really well.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Just like improv, you keep, you want the rule of yes, and you want to keep things
Exactly.
moving along, and the game has a flow to it. Plus, a lot of the game is supposed to be about rolling dice, and most of that is during the action sequences. You can roll dice
Yeah.
to check on things and to explore and investigate, but most of your dice rolling is going to be during combat, and actually, most of the
Yeah.
actions really only are actually in combat. Like there's not a lot of actions other than that, and you can have some of that, but so people have to decide, which of those pillars are they going to focus on. So that's another kind of thing you can look into in terms of the overall campaign. Um,
Yeah.
you also want to look at where is this going to be, what's your setting going to be. So the most popular setting now for D&D is Forgotten Realms. um, there's parts of it I really like. The part of it that personally I don't really resonate with is that everything can be put into that setting. They've put everything in there. So
Yeah.
to me, that doesn't feel as organic. Where the world of Greyhawk from the 80s, to me, it feels like a much more organic setting, and it feels more real, immersive. The names for me seem to be more realistic in general.
Right.
Um, so there's options, and then we have our world of Mir, and then of course people can create their own world, their homebrew world. So
I I'm glad.
what settings have you played in?
Um, all of the above actually,
Hmm.
especially well, over the past few years, it's been most of it. It's been in the world of Mir. But I'm glad you put you actually brought up a little in our thing in our notes for the world of Kryn, which is
Right.
the whole Dragonlance thing, and that's one world that I remember surprisingly well. Because those novels came out at early teens, mid teens, that's sort of that right time, where I was really getting into. I just read Lord of the Rings for the first time, and then I was looking for other things, and I played a session at a friend's house with a Dragonlance module where they had the cards that you cut out, so the character stats were already there, and
Right.
you played a character that was, I guess, featured in the books as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But and that sort of introduced me to the world, and that's when I got into reading those books. And but the nice thing about the Dragonlance world is that they made some very conscious choices about. Um, they wanted it to be. I guess the novelists wanted it to be distinguishable from other worlds that had come before, like Greyhawk and whatnot, because you had the what are they called, the Draconians, which is sort of that, I guess, the predecessor to like a dragon hybrid sort of creature,
Yeah.
and those kinds of things. So they actually had some very distinct things. Uh, they had a world that actually had been broken. Like I think
Hmm.
there was the Maelstrom thing, um, which added some stuff to the whole storytelling of that, and but it didn't go so far as to change things so drastically that you couldn't take a character that say you had a party that was really cohesive, really well, wanted to keep playing together, and their
Hmm.
adventure ended, that it kind of gives them flexibility of like, well, there's a portal, or you guys wake up and suddenly something's different, and
Hmm.
you could transport your characters into worlds like that. So um but yeah, but it definitely gives you a lot of campaign ideas about, I think, as a DM, to kind of push them, gently forward, like the players I like to do with, and stuff like that. So, but it gave you some variety. I think that's kind of where I'm going with this, is the variety of, like the Draconians, you had different creatures you'd not seen before.
Hmm.
You had environments that you hadn't seen before, and I guess kind of like some, if you were fans of the novels, that you'd have encounters with characters from the books or whatnot, either
Right.
through their journey of the novel, or they're just, I don't know, maybe they're on holiday and they're hanging out or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of like that. That I think a lot of people kind of enjoy that stuff, where you can have a character that's, say if Superman showed up, it's like, oh my God, Superman's here, and oh, I need some help going to, I don't know, Krypton. Okay, let's go, or something like that. It kind of gives you that extra little buzz, I think. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true about Crinan. They had like the halflings were a little bit different than the regular ones, and the dwarves were different, and and then of course the real focus on dragons, of course, was which is
yeah,
always that's one of those archetypes, that people resonate with, and it's never going to change. It's going to be always going to be a key archetype. So yeah, there's a lot of choices with settings, and those that once you make that choice with your party, or if you've got an idea for a story that you really want to run with, that's gonna affect what kind of characters the players can have to a certain degree,
yeah,
because there's some settings where there's not going to be a certain race or a certain class. For example, in Greyhawk, there's no tieflings, there's no dragonborn, there's no Aarakocra, so your setting will change. Like our world of Mir, the first part of Mir that we were playing in was mostly humans, elves, dwarves, and then if you were another race, you really had to have a good story of how would your character fit in. So your
yeah,
setting is going to affect a lot of your campaign. A
yeah,
new dungeon master, you might want to take a look at a published campaign and a published adventure. For example, in fifth edition, that is what is being put out, is the Curse of Strahd, and Out of the Abyss, and Storm King's Thunder, and all these big campaign adventures. So when you use those, a lot of the work is being done for you.
yeah,
And really, what you need to do is read through everything so you know it very well. You can, of course, take things out and add things that will suit your game and your tastes. And then you want to make notes about what you've read so that you can have notes ready at the table that will help you. So for new dungeon masters, I think it's a better idea in general to start with a published adventure, a published campaign adventure, and then as you get more and more practice, then you might want to break off and do more and more homebrew. And I think there's more homebrew now than there ever was before. I know I know more dungeon masters playing in homebrew campaigns than before, where most people a lot of people were playing in Greyhawk. Some people were playing in the World of Kryn that Shane mentioned. So yeah, that's one option for a new person, is to is to go look at something published, and you get an idea of how encounters are organized, how treasure is organized in the encounters. So it gives you a good template to go forward.
Well, I mean, that is actually the best way to learn those kinds of things, where if you already can follow the footsteps of somebody or many other DMs or players, beforehand.
Hmm.
Like the first time I started writing a couple years ago, I started writing an adventure. It was really more of a practice thing where I kind of wanted to know how the format worked, because when I was a kid, adventures were all about what's in the next room. We didn't really treat it as there's an overarching kind of story
Hmm.
being told, which I think is a natural thing for players when they're first doing it, especially when they're young. But as I was tinkering with the idea of creating an adventure, just for the fun of it, I leaned heavily on Strahd, and I actually was looking at Tomb of Horrors as well,
Hmm.
because to me those are very distinct sort of adventures, and they tell their stories in a bit of a different way. And so I learned a lot from just doing that and kind of going, okay, well, in Strahd they had this happen and this happened and this was connected, and okay, so I could do that. I could have to create something new to fill those gaps, and it really did kind of give you an idea of how to build theme and how to build an idea of sort of I don't know. Say for example, you had an underwater world, and suddenly you're very limited with the types of races you could have, or the types of skills that somebody would need in order to actually have those adventures. Not have everyone drowning in the first 10 minutes.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, those kinds of things, the thematic stuff, especially where I had an idea for an adventure where the everything was completely evil except for the party. There was no one you could lean on. There was
Right.
no sort of conclaves of characters you could suddenly adventure with.
Yeah.
Um, you just had to basically survive to the end, and that's a very hard thing to do, because uh, it's basically, I think Everness kind of tries to do that
Hmm.
a little bit, but um, it was more of just an experiment to see if it could actually work, for at least in my experience. But it really did bring out uh, how well characters have to be played. Where if it is a character who is the pure hero, or the character who is, I don't know, fearful of something in particular, or has a flaw that can be used, you can force those kinds of things to go, especially when um, you have the DM who's paying close attention to the backstories of a player. So if you have, and we've touched on this before, where we've had characters that had, a passing reference to siblings or parents or other
Hmm.
family members, and then suddenly, boom, those characters have come to life. And it's like, I think for one of my adventures, I had my mother show up, and so I had to protect my mother. That was kind of the relationship that I had sort of
Yeah. Yeah.
established, and stuff like that can really, it can work so well if and it doesn't require, like, okay, we've got 25 hours of planning for this adventure. No, you don't need that,
No.
because you want the characters to react naturally, and not have to I don't know, be dependent upon those sorts of ideals as well. But but yeah, but definitely I was leaning heavily on those other adventures when I was putting those things together, to kind of figure out how to drive characters forward, how to drive the players forward, how to keep them interested. Just all of that worked so well uh, for those old adventures, and I think inform people with new adventures. I mean, World of Mir. What would be your heavy influence? Like, where would you think that comes from?
Oh, definitely World of Greyhawk. Again, the organic nature of it, how there's a definite plan about how the economy works, about how the political factions work, how it's classic fantasy. There's a lot of detail, but there's still a lot of room for the dungeon master to create what they want to create and to fit what they want to fit into the world. So a lot of people know that about Greyhawk, that It gives you a lot of detail, but you can really easily fit your stories and your style in there. It's Gary Gygax, who wrote it, left a lot of that space. So he didn't do all the heavy lifting for you.
Right.
Yeah. So when you do start with homebrew, you definitely want to start small. And another example with the World of Mir is that we started with one village. So initially, when I came back to fifth edition, I went to DM this group. I didn't know the people at their house. I didn't know if it was going to last longer than a session because we didn't know how we'd get along or anything. So all I knew is we had one session, and so I made a village in the wilderness, and I had the beginnings of a story of a family who used to be royalty and they'd lost their throne years and years ago. And I knew that the story later on could be that this family would eventually regain the throne. And what happened was that took 2 years. So that first night, that first episode in the village, where I only had the village mapped out in the surrounding area and characters in that area. Later on, that became an entire continent that we explored for 2 years. And at the end of that, that family regained their throne. That was when, spoiler
Nice.
alert, when Kira regained her throne. Um, so, yeah, start out small. And the really convenient thing is that the characters can't really travel very far when they're first level and for the lower levels because they don't have enough gold to buy horses. They don't have the magic to teleport or magic items. And so there's only a certain amount of territory they can cover, and you can just make sure to cover that with a certain amount of encounters and of course non-player characters. So at the beginning, you want to look at what are the correct monsters for that sort of level, and this you can find in the Dungeon Master's Guide or in the basic rules. And you can look at that list of monsters and say, okay, which ones would fit this setting, and
Yeah.
then you can start to create a story, craft a story. You can add NPCs that might be humanoids, might be humans or elves or whatever you want. And you take notes on all of this, and you can start to form a campaign and the beginnings of an arc. You don't have to know exactly where it's going to end up. You could, um, and there's so many examples of great stories that we have now. I mean, we have probably the greatest era in television ever, and then we have all these classic
Yeah.
movies like Lord of the Rings and the Indiana Jones movies and the Star Wars, well, before Disney got involved. And there's lots of stories we have there. Epic movies like Inception, amazing TV shows like Westworld and even Homeland for the politics in it.
Yeah.
So there's so many options in terms of those stories, and of course all the literature as well. Um, Yeah, and we've had two campaigns, our group, the West of the Wood group with Shane, where we went from first level to 20th. And the first one started out where you basically ran into the beginnings of a faction, mostly lawful evil faction. And the beginning, you ran into halflings who were these rogues and scoundrels and thieves, low level, but causing lots of problems in a city. Then you find out behind them there's another layer of lawful evil creatures, and then behind them was another layer, and it kept getting unpeeled.
Yeah.
The other campaign, that was a very traditional heroic campaign. The other one we had was one where you were all smugglers to start out with. So nobody could be lawful, nobody could be good. And you eventually got involved in a campaign where there was undead coming into the world, and the final part of that campaign was that it was a lich king who was actually behind all of it.
Right, I remember
So
that.
yeah, so there's many options, many obviously, numerous ways you could go with the stories.
Yeah, one of my addictions is coming up with ways to start campaigns where because there's books and all kinds of articles out there, you find yourself in a tavern.
Right.
And one campaign that I did a few years back was uh, when the characters were starting out, they had created their sheets, um, but they hadn't been introduced to each other. Where I started them out in a jail cell, and they were in this castle somewhere along a coastline, and they had been in jail for a little while. They were in separate sort of areas, and they had to kind of figure out how to break out and whatnot. And but I threw a curveball at them because they were taking too long. So I had in the back of my mind this idea that you could actually have uh, what is it, the beginning action, that I was originally had planned out, that they were going to be taken out of the courtyard to be executed or whatever, and then something would happen. But I, running the game, I actually was watching them, and they were just kind of gelling in this really cool way. And then I
Hmm.
said, okay, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them. They're making these plans and whatnot, and I thought, suddenly the wall behind two of your cells explodes in a ball of fire. And I just on the spot thought, well, they're on a coastline, so what if there was, I don't know, a ship or something that was trying to rescue somebody else unrelated to
Right,
them, and
right,
just suddenly the wall blows away.
right, right.
And then I just said, okay, I don't care. You got to keep going. You got to run because there's these fireballs just coming out of nowhere, and they're exploding everywhere, and you got to keep moving. And that actually really gelled them even more because they were having to save each other from falling off of things and
Yeah, yeah,
walls collapsing on them, and then when they got clear of everything, they were kind of this cohesive unit, which I really liked. And it just started off, when I did that, it started off this obsession of writing down different ways to start a game. And then halfway through, how do you relate back to that adventure? And then how, does that lead into the end? And what kind of NPCs do you throw in? And it got really cool. And it didn't require any creatures, which is what I had initially planned. And stuff like that. It's really, I guess I'm just kind of really excited about the whole idea of the homebrew, because it doesn't, you have such freedom in being able
hmm,
to you know use inspiration from other things, but definitely try and give yourself some I don't know, just a bit of a flavor that if somebody plays your adventure 5 years down the road, they're like, oh yeah, I saw this one, that guy Andrew, he did one, yeah, yeah, actually no, it's him, yeah, it's cool. But just stuff like that, because a lot of those details, like you're saying about the politics of environments and factions and things like that, I've played games where that never happens, and I gotta
yeah,
admit, it kind of gets boring after a while, because
yeah,
you don't know who's who the players are. You don't know where the chess pieces are on the board,
yeah.
and after a while, it's just like, well, why are we doing this again? What kind of stuff is going to, uh, you know, what's important anymore? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I like, I know you have a background in improv, and that's a, you know, a big can be a really big part of the game. And people who have that real natural storytelling instinct can sometimes add uh, flavor that they never imagined. That just seems you just know that's the right time to do something. And also, I think, the most important thing I think for dungeon masters is to listen. And
yeah,
if you listen, you can that's the thing, that's what you were doing, and that's why you knew that, oh, this is the time. And I think if you listen to your players, you can get so much information and add so much to the game, where your planned encounter might be, you might have a much better idea. And like you said, there's so many ways to start. I know one of the most popular mods on Skyrim is alternate starts. So it gives you it gives you about, I think, a dozen or so new starts from the vanilla game. And
yeah,
so there's great ones there. Like another great one, yours in the jail is a really good idea. There's one. where the shipwreck is a great way to start a campaign. They're all shipwrecked together, right? Or even if you don't want to meet in a tavern, they could meet at a. I've had a campaign start where the players met at a campfire outside the town, and they just happened to all be traveling, and they all just run. They ended up at this point together. Um, there's so many ways to do it. I had another campaign that I started with you guys where somebody was being chased by thugs in a city, and you were all kind of sitting outside of this inn, and you had to act and go and help this person. I mean, if you didn't do that, the campaign wouldn't have started very well. But I assumed, like you said, people know, the idea behind the game is that it's a group of heroes working towards something. So luckily, you all acted and went to go rescue this person. So yeah, there are so many possibilities. Another, like you say, if it was they're inside a building and the building's being attacked, or there could be an earthquake, or some sort of other natural disaster that could bring the party together.
I just thought of one that I wrote down, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah.
Uh, or it's right, actually, it was right before the holidays. Because actually, I took some time off right before the holidays, and was doing a few little odds and ends with creative outlet. And one of the ones I wrote down was going to a birthday party. Completely simple, like it's like but all the characters were brought to the birthday party by somebody
Right.
else. It's like, oh, my
Right.
friend Joe, it's got this
Right.
birthday
Right.
party.
Right.
You should come. Okay. And like they just are, why are we here? I don't know the guy, it's that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one. Actually, you just gave me an idea too. I've had a wedding during a campaign before, but another good one, which you give me, the thought there that you could start at a wedding as well, and that's another really good one, I think. Like your
Yeah,
birthday
just
party idea.
stuff where people are just coming together, and they either are like a character could be the best man or the person getting married or
Right.
whatever. But you
Right.
could, like for that part, the birthday party one, I made it so that they didn't know each other very well or at all, and they
Right.
were there
Right.
just to support somebody else, and
Right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, I love that idea.
But
What if you
I
what
like
if
the
you
wedding idea. That's
started
cool.
and one of the characters was a groom who got and the bride just didn't go through with the wedding.
Just bolted and left, and
She just
everyone who's there to watch is like, oh, this is awkward.
Yeah. Or the reverse. It could be that the bride has decided, this is a terrible idea, and her friends are all the characters, and she tells them, "That's it, I'm out of here," and she takes off, and they have to go with her. So
That's true, because you could have NPCs completely drive the beginning, because I
yeah,
think a lot of players would be like grateful for that, because they're not necessarily going to they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I fit into this world? How do I fit into this particular group of people?
right.
And then just somebody comes along and it's like, guys, yeah, I'm leaving, and you got
Yeah,
to come with me. Well, why do we have to come with you? Gold or something, or whatever the
yeah,
reason
yeah,
is.
yeah,
And everyone just kind of goes, oh, sure, why not?
yeah.
Why? And
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder too, again, about how you want to make sure that, well, you don't have to, but it's helpful to include the players' backstories as much as possible, I think, and it helps add more flavor to your story and get your players involved. And there's people come up with fantastic ideas that could, add so much more depth to the game. So that's another
yeah.
thing you can fit into your campaign. Um, and at times, those have been major parts of my campaign. And then other times, it hasn't been as prominent.
True. I mean, I always pick on a game I played years ago where I created this, elaborate background for this person. It was a like a World War I sort of venture campaign thing.
Mhm.
I've forgotten the actual game engine. I think World of Darkness or something. Anyway, something like that. Anyway, not important, but uh, it was so incredibly. You had no idea what was going on, to the point of you just didn't know why you were playing anymore. And it was a homebrew thing, and the NPCs were boring. We kept getting killed. That was the other thing too, is we kept dying over and over and over again, having to reinvent another character. and it just seemed like you were playing for the sake of somebody's ego, and it just really got
Right.
terrible, and and that really just was disappointing, and that is always in the back of my mind when playing. I don't want to be boring. I need to, my
Right.
character. I
Right.
have to get my character involved. If I'm running a game, I have to make sure that everyone feels that they've had a chance to kind of, push something forward. And if they're not into it that moment, great. Who's the next character that can do
Right.
something, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, and it was a very large adventure that had been overly planned, and it just really it was grinding. It was like playing a game
Yeah.
where you're grinding to get,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. You
gold or
definitely
something.
you want to make sure your players are rolling dice in D&D. They're, again, that's why I think action and combat usually is a big part of it. And like you say, you want to make sure that people are really invested. And another thing to do, especially if you're a newer DM, I think I do it maybe once or twice a year, is I poll everybody in the each group, and I ask them, what kind of creatures would you like in the games more, and maybe what kind of setting. I do that once in a while to look at other options. I know, like for example, with our West of the Wood group, I asked you guys about 2 years ago in a poll what was the next setting you wanted, and the majority of people wanted to go back to the underworld, where we've
Yeah,
had some adventures, but nothing really long term. So we're doing that again right now. And then I'll ask, what kind of creatures would you like to see more as well? So, and players might say, oh, we'd really like to see a beholder or a dragon, or we want more undead, or whatever it is. So I think there's ways to check in with your group. And again, when you're starting out, you might want to do that more.
yeah.
At the same time, we live in an age where everybody's so concerned about being collaborative and checking in with everyone. And I think there's room for that, but I think too much of that, you lose your voice as a storyteller. So I think most of the time, I would focus on things you love to do and that you enjoy. And then, obviously, if your players like it, they're going to keep playing. If they don't, you try to figure something out, or they find a different group. But I think there's a little bit too much of that worrying about making sure that everyone's okay.
I could see that because I mean that, like when you have characters, or sorry, not characters, but players who have, um, I would say probably 3 or 4 times in the history of me playing where when a character died, the player was just enraged that their
Right.
character could have possibly died, and for like it mattered, to be honest. But it was uh, the adventures that we've had. But I lost my train of thought. Oh my god. No, that's it. That's what age. This is what age does when you become an old wizard. That this is what happens. You have a thought that's really
Well,
important, and then
yeah, I was talking about how, I think, there is collaboration's important. It's part of D&D. But I think as far as storytelling, sometimes there's too much of that these days, where people are making sure that everybody has what they want, as opposed to
yeah,
somebody actually using their creative voice and their creative instincts.
that's what I was thinking of earlier. Is that the over reliance on the players on the DM? I think can happen once in a while, because they are not. I don't know. They're having a bad day, or they really are.
Mhm.
They're not interested for whatever reason, and they're not able to push the story forward, and they get bored. And I think that the reaction to a lot of that is like you were saying, like there's a lot of worry coming into it about making sure that everybody has what they want, or
Mhm.
what is happening is this, like players trying to direct the story in a way where I suddenly want to have a bubblegum factory.
Mhm.
Sorry, wait, why do we need a bubblegum
Mhm.
factory, like that kind of stuff. And I've had
Mhm.
conversations after games and whatnot where they've had suggestions about things, and some of them are just sort of so incredibly outside of
Mhm.
logical sense, that you have that sort of potential for worry, I guess. But ultimately, it's a game, and you could in theory create, okay, well, they want a bubblegum factory, that makes no sense, maybe it's a colorful spell factory or something where
Yeah.
you can kind of work that in, and rather than worrying about whether or not everyone is happy with that choice.
Right.
um, because the other thing too that came to mind just now is that when that kind of that direction stuff, that sort of that concern sort of takes over, it's like people are reacting to it as themselves, not the character they're playing. And you could be, I mean, you can play thieves, you can play holy people, you can play like all kinds
Mhm.
of things. And I think one of our players is one of my favorite things, where they have a character that shows up every once in a while who is so incredibly anti undead, no matter what the hell is going on. If there's
Yeah.
an undead that shows up, that character's like, all right, this is going to happen. And
Yeah.
it's like, people are in there, you walking into a room or into a wherever it is, going, okay, well, what's around? And then suddenly this character goes running by, you're gonna die. And then
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, well, we have to react now. And I love that kind of play where the characters react, not the player, because the hopefully you'll have a very rare situation where humans have to interact and have conversations that you shouldn't throw popcorn at the table,
Yeah.
or whatever it might be. But um, yeah, I've seen that too. I just that whole, I mean, this is almost like a tagline for the show in my mind now. Is like, it's just a game.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is not your workplace. This is not
Yeah.
your school. This is a fun space.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What you're talking about is all the projection that's going on. And I think for some whatever reason that happens more now than it used to. And everybody being concerned that everything in the game should be the ideal as in the world that they want.
Yeah.
Where it's a fantasy game, and you, like you say, you're playing a character that's not you, and we're doing this for fun.
It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I don't really have a solution other than just remind people gently, when they're playing, like, we're here to have fun. You don't need to be upset, because I have, I've seen a lot of different sort of interactions behind the scenes where people are upset about whatever,
Right, right.
and you kind of have to eventually, hopefully not, but eventually sometimes you have to be like, are you, well, I guess this is condescending, but are you 12? like, like, do we really have to have this conversation? Because ultimately, I'm an adult. You're an adult. Come on. But it's so weird that a lot of our conversations kind of delve into that world of like interpersonal stuff at the table, which
Yeah,
luckily, knock on
yeah,
wood, I will want to say to everybody, doesn't happen that often. Usually, most times, you're going to have people that get together and they gel nicely, and you never have these problems, but it does happen once in a while. Like, how many times can you really polish a sword or your armor? I mean, really,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's always one of my favorites.
Yeah, that was a classic for sure. Yeah, no, I think most tables are fairly peaceful, and people get along, and um, yeah, for sure. And we're just giving some ideas and hints in terms of an overall idea of what your campaign might be like. And then next time we can look at um, how to start out and how to do one session, as opposed to just to looking at um, the whole campaign, which is going to be a series of adventures, series of sessions that could last weeks or years in some cases.
Like we were saying last episode or a couple episodes ago, but they 35 years or something like that. It was amazing.
Yeah,
Like, I want to be playing in a campaign for 35 years.
yeah,
So
yeah. There was a group. There's a group in Ontario, I believe. I think it's a guy's a teacher, and that basically would be people, yeah, around our age, and they've never stopped playing. Like they started in the late '70s, early '80s, and they never stopped. I I couldn't imagine that. Yeah, that would be amazing.
totally want to have more playing, more games.
But I think
But
our group, West of the Wood, I think in September will be 7 years. Yeah.
it's I actually in my Google photo albums, it reminded me just the other last week or the week before. Um, I suddenly had this whole album that had been automatically generated, which was just figurines on a table on a battle mat, and it was like, remember 5 years ago, and I'm like, this every single thing. It's I must have gone crazy. The tables like everything needs a photo today, but it was kind of amazing, and I miss playing in person. I
Yeah.
can't wait till we can do that again.
Yeah, I think we're probably fairly close now, I think. I think it's knock on wood. Yeah, I think hopefully we're not too far away now.
I will be very pleased when we actually do that again because I I'm I'm getting the itch, that itch of like just being able to perform at a table with cool people and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
just me. Any final words for any final wisdom for planning a D&D campaign?
Well, again, I think starting small, looking at classic adventures, not just for fifth edition, but go back to first edition and look at some of the classic adventures. So yeah, and I think step by step, and there's also a real push of, especially these days, about how to be a dungeon master. Like you have to play the role. I think I would I would look at it more like just be yourself and look at and follow things that you're interested in. And again, as you start out, it's a good idea to check in with the players what they want. Um, but yeah, I think it's more about having fun and doing what you're interested in, what your skills are and your focus. So that would be my advice.
I think for my advice would be a probably to always plan for ways where characters can have that moment of pause, where they can gel as a. I keep using the word gel today, but
Mhm.
essentially giving them that space to drive the action. And if they take too long, have a list of things that you could actually do. Like, okay, well, they're in a forest, so what could actually happen in a forest? Oh, suddenly 1,700 owl bears show up out of nowhere, and they're you've interrupted their rave, and they're very disappointed. Uh, so just stuff like that because
Yeah.
like the exploding castle, like stuff like that, just can be thrown in and sprinkled around for some flavor, and and give them the opportunity to gel in one way, but also gel in another, where it's like, hey, suddenly the forest is on fire. What are we gonna do about that? Run or put
Mhm.
it out, or just have a little list of stuff like that. That
Mhm.
I don't know. This is my thing. I like that, but.
Yeah. Sounds good.
But very good. All right. Well, we'll see you all next week, of course, and we're going to be talking about some really important stuff. So you better come back because if you don't, you're going to miss out, and you'll just you'll feel sad, and you'll have to come back and watch this one over again.
Later.
And of course, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. And again, Cawood Publishing. It's where you got to be, man. If you don't go there, you'll be missing out. See you all next week.
All right.
Bye.
It's a game.